My name's Emily. I'm 42 years old, and I never thought my life would be turned upside down by both a crash and betrayal. I survived what should have ended me, only to learn my husband had moved on with someone new while using my inheritance. And when his new wife saw me alive, she screamed, "Stick around, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories on family drama, betrayal, and emotional courage. The sound of crushing metal still lives inside my head. 1 second, headlights blinded me on that dark road, and the next, I was thrown into silence. When I finally opened my eyes again, weeks had slipped through my fingers like sand. A nurse hovered above me, her voice trembling as she said, "Emily, you're lucky to be alive." At first, I didn't believe her. My body was broken, wrapped in bandages, tubes, and bruises that painted me in colors I'd never seen before. But it wasn't the pain that cut the deepest. It was the empty chair beside my bed. No flowers, no notes, no husband holding my hand like he had promised on the day we married. I asked for him. His name caught in my throat, dry and shaky, but the nurse avoided my eyes. She mumbled something about no visits yet. My heart sank. Michael, my husband, knew about the inheritance. He knew how much his support would mean to me in this moment. But days passed, and still he didn't come. Lying there in that sterile room, I began to notice how the staff looked at me when they thought I wasn't watching. They spoke in whispers, eyes darting away quickly, like they carried a secret too heavy for them to hold. It wasn't just pity. It was something darker. One morning, a social worker came in with a clipboard. She sat at the edge of my bed, her smile polite but strained. "Emily," she said, "we need to discuss your estate and legal guardianship just to make sure everything's in order while you recover." My stomach dropped. Why would they be bringing this up so soon? My estate? I was alive, breathing, very much here. I asked where Michael was. The social worker's expression tightened, and after a pause too long to ignore, she told me he had already signed documents. Documents giving him control of my assets while I was in recovery. That was the first crack in the mirror of my marriage. I couldn't speak for a long time after she left. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them over and over again, just to keep from screaming. $11 million. That's what I had inherited from my late aunt. Money that was supposed to give me freedom, security, a chance to finally breathe after years of scraping by. And now it was in Michael's hands. When my sister, Claire, finally visited, her face told me more than her words. She hugged me gently, careful of my injuries, and whispered, "You need to be strong for what I'm about to tell you." She explained that Michael hadn't just signed papers. He had disappeared from the hospital within days of my crash. While I was unconscious, he had started showing up around town with another woman. At first, people thought she was a friend or maybe a distant cousin. But then came the hand-holding, the late-night dinners, the whispers of wedding bells. I felt sick. My body ached from the accident. But this betrayal cut deeper than any wound. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had replaced me before I had even healed. But what froze me in place was Claire's final words that day. He's remarried." The room spun. I remember clutching the sheets, pulling them so tight my knuckles turned white. How could he remarry when I was still alive, still fighting for my life? It didn't make sense. Unless he wanted me gone. The thought lodged itself in my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Every day in that hospital became a battle, not just with my broken bones, but with the storm inside me. Nurses checked my vitals, but no one could check the cracks forming in my heart. Nights were the hardest. I'd stare out the window, watching headlights flicker on the road, and wonder if the crash had really been an accident. One evening, I overheard two orderlies near my door. They didn't notice I was awake. One whispered, "She's tougher than they thought." Everyone assumed she'd be gone by now. The other replied, "Well, someone's not going to be happy she pulled through." Their words burned into me. Someone's not going to be happy I pulled through. From that night on, my recovery became more than physical. It became a mission. Every painful stretch, every breath that felt like fire in my ribs, I forced myself to push through. Not because I wanted to heal, but because I needed answers. The day I was discharged, I felt like a stranger walking into my own life. Claire drove me back to the suburbs, but nothing looked the same. My house, the one I had worked so hard for, stood proud at the end of the street, but there were new curtains in the windows, fresh flowers on the porch, and a car in the driveway that didn't belong to me. I froze. Claire gripped the steering wheel and whispered, "You need to be ready for this." I wasn't ready. Nothing could have prepared me. Through the blinds, I saw him, Michael, laughing, his arm draped around a woman I had never seen before. My stomach twisted as I realized she wasn't just living in my house. She was living my life. In that moment, the crash felt like only the beginning. The real wreckage was standing right there, inside my home, smiling as if I had never existed. I turned to Claire, my voice barely more than a whisper. "He thinks I'm gone, but I'm not. And one day he's going to see just how alive I really am." That was the day my survival turned into something else entirely. Claire parked at the curb, her hands clenched so tightly on the wheel that her knuckles looked pale. I sat frozen in the passenger seat, staring at the house that once felt like my sanctuary. Now it looked unfamiliar, like a stage set for someone else's life. New porch furniture, bright flowers I never planted, and curtains I wouldn't have chosen. It was mine, and yet it wasn't. "I can't go in there," I whispered, my throat dry. Claire turned to me. Her eyes were sharp but gentle, the way only a sister's could be. "You don't have to, not today. But, Emily, you can't hide from this forever. People already know you're back. They'll be talking." She was right. In a small neighborhood like ours, word spread faster than fire in dry grass. And I could already feel it, the weight of eyes peeking through blinds, the faint movement of curtains. When we finally stepped out of the car, the air felt heavier. The crunch of gravel under my shoes echoed, louder than it should have. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Turner, froze mid-watering her roses. Her hose slipped, spraying the sidewalk as her mouth fell open. She didn't wave, didn't call out a greeting. She just stared like she'd seen something unnatural. I gave a weak smile, raising my hand halfway in a hesitant wave. She snapped her blinds shut so quickly I flinched. Claire muttered under her breath, "Well, that was warm." We walked up the street, and the whispers followed. At the corner, two teenage girls giggled behind their phones, one pointing at me before shushing the other. An older man, walking his dog, turned the other way, without even acknowledging us. Every face I saw carried the same look, a mix of shock, discomfort, and something I couldn't quite name. Finally, at the small convenience store, the truth began to leak out. The bell over the door jingled as we walked in, and the familiar scent of coffee and floor cleaner hit me like a memory. The clerk, a young man named Aaron who had worked there for years, blinked when he saw me. His smile faltered. "Emily?" His voice cracked on my name. "Hi, Aaron," I said softly, trying to sound normal. "It's been a while." He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted to Claire, then back to me. Then he leaned forward and whispered, "People thought you weren't coming back." The way he said it sent a shiver up my spine. Claire cut in sharply. "Well, she's here, alive, and standing right in front of you." Aaron nodded quickly, but I could see the unease in his expression. He rang up our purchases without another word, but as we left, I caught sight of a woman at the back of the store, whispering into her phone while staring at me. By the time we reached the sidewalk again, I felt dizzy. My neighborhood, the place where I had baked pies for block parties, lent tools to neighbors, and shared Sunday chats on the porch, had turned cold. I was no longer Emily, their neighbor. I was something else now, something people whispered about. That night, I stayed at Claire's house, lying awake on the pull-out sofa. The street outside was quiet, but inside my mind, voices swirled. Every whisper, every sideways glance replayed itself. Why were they reacting like this? Why was my return met with fear, not relief? The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay hidden indoors. I needed to see more, hear more, even if it hurt. So I went for a slow walk around the neighborhood. Halfway down Oak Street, I caught sight of Mrs. Jennings, a widow who had always been kind to me. She was unloading groceries from her car, her small frame struggling with the weight of the bags. Instinctively, I hurried over. "Let me help you with that," I offered. She stiffened at the sound of my voice. Turning, her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she dropped the bag. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Lord have mercy, it's really you." "Yes, it's me," I said gently. "I'm back." But instead of relief, her face clouded. She glanced around, lowered her voice, and said, "Emily, maybe you shouldn't be walking around like this. Folks aren't ready." "Not ready for what?" I asked, confusion and frustration boiling together. She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's not my place. Just be careful." She hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Later that afternoon, Claire went back to work, and I sat alone in her kitchen. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of two women's voices outside the window. They were walking past, not realizing I could hear them. "Can you believe she's alive?" one said. "I swear, when I saw her yesterday, I almost screamed. She looks different. Her poor husband. He must have been so torn up, moving on like that." The words hit me like a blow. Poor husband? Michael? The same man who left me in that hospital bed, who remarried while I fought for my life. I pressed my palms against the table, fighting the urge to throw open the window and shout the truth. But something stopped me. Their tone, it wasn't just gossip. It was almost rehearsed, like they were repeating what they'd been told. That evening, I decided to test the waters myself. I walked into the local diner, the one where Michael and I used to spend Saturday mornings sharing pancakes. The bell over the door jingled, and every head in the room turned. Forks froze in midair. Conversations cut off. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and tried to act like nothing was wrong. But the silence pressed against me like a weight. Finally, the waitress, a young woman with nervous eyes, leaned closer. "I shouldn't say this, but people around here think you shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Why?" My voice cracked despite my effort to stay calm. She shook her head quickly. "All I know is your husband told folks you were gone, that he had no choice but to move on. And now, seeing you back, it's like you've upset something people were told to accept." I left the diner shaking. The whispers weren't just gossip. They were part of a story Michael had spun, one the whole neighborhood had bought into. As I walked home, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I caught sight of my old house again. Through the window, I saw movement. Michael laughing with that woman. My replacement. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. She leaned close to him, whispering in his ear. He looked out the window right in my direction, as if he knew I was there. The blinds snapped shut. I stood frozen in the dark street, the whispers of the neighborhood buzzing in my ears. They weren't just idle talk. They were warnings, stories shaped to keep me silent. And now, I understood why the new wife screamed when she first saw me. Because to them, I wasn't supposed to be here at all. I thought I was prepared. I had already heard her name, whispered across fences, and exchanged in low voices at the grocery store. People had dropped hints, glances, even soft apologies when they realized I had caught them mid-conversation. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I finally saw her. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when it happened. The late autumn sun was sliding down behind the bare branches, painting the neighborhood in shades of fading gold. I had just stepped outside to fetch the mail, moving carefully, my body still healing in ways no one could see. The air was crisp, sharp with the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. And then I froze. Across the street, standing in my driveway, my old driveway, was a woman. She was holding a grocery bag against her hip, laughing at something my husband, no, her husband now, had just said. My chest tightened, so hard it felt like my ribs were trying to collapse inward. She looked ordinary. That was the first thought that struck me. Not a glamorous villain from a soap opera, not someone impossibly perfect. She was my height, maybe a little taller, with long dark hair that shone under the weak sun. She wore jeans, a simple sweater, and sneakers like she belonged, like she had always belonged. And yet there was something almost cruel about her ease. She fit into the picture of my old life, as if she had been cut out of a magazine and pasted there. My hand trembled as I clutched the cold metal mailbox. I should have turned back, gone inside before she noticed, but my legs rooted to the ground, betraying me. Then her eyes met mine. For a split second, confusion flickered across her face. Then realization hit, and her smile faltered. The bag of groceries slipped slightly in her arms. "Emily," she said, her voice carrying across the street like a soft strike of lightning. My name on her lips made my stomach churn. She knew me. She didn't just know about me. She knew me. Before I could answer, my husband appeared behind her. He was carrying another bag, keys dangling from his hand. When he saw me, he froze too. The look in his eyes wasn't the relief of someone seeing a miracle. It was something darker, something unsettled, like a man caught in the middle of a storm he thought had already passed. "Emily," he muttered, his voice low, almost warning. The woman glanced between us, her lips pressing into a thin line. I could see the question in her eyes. Why is she here? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice past the knot in my throat. "So," I said softly, though the words carried in the still air, "you're the woman who replaced me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Her expression shifted, guilt, defensiveness, maybe even pity. I hated the pity most of all. She stepped closer, adjusting the grocery bag against her hip. "I didn't replace you," she said carefully, as if choosing her words could make this less brutal. I just moved in. I cut her off, my voice sharper now. Moved into my house, into my life, into my husband's arms. She flinched. My husband opened his mouth, maybe to defend her, maybe to silence me, but I wasn't looking at him anymore. My eyes were locked on hers. For a long moment, we stood there, two women tethered by the same man, separated by invisible battle lines drawn across cracked pavement. Finally, she set her bag down on the hood of the car and folded her arms. "You don't know everything," she said quietly. The words hit me like a slap. I felt heat rising up my neck. Then enlighten me, I whispered. She hesitated, glancing at my husband again, and I noticed the way he shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, his eyes darting away like a guilty child. That was when it hit me. There was more. More than the accident, more than the betrayal. My legs weakened, and I gripped the mailbox harder to steady myself. My mind spun, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Tell me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She opened her mouth, but my husband's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Not here," he muttered. His voice was low, urgent, almost desperate. I saw the conflict flash across her face. For a second, she looked like she wanted to pull away from him, to speak the words sitting heavy on her tongue. But then she closed her mouth, her gaze falling to the ground. Something twisted inside me. Anger, frustration, a desperate hunger for the truth. "I see," I said, my tone colder now. "You both have secrets, and you thought I wouldn't be around to hear them." Neither of them spoke. The woman finally lifted her head again, her eyes meeting mine with something raw, regret, maybe even sorrow. "I never wanted it to happen this way," she whispered. Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had already given too much. "And yet," I said softly, "here we are." I turned, clutching the mail I had nearly forgotten, and walked back toward the house. My steps were uneven, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I didn't look back, but I felt their eyes on me the whole way. Inside, I collapsed against the door, the cool wood pressing against my back. My body shook, not from pain this time, but from the flood of emotions I could no longer contain. Rage, grief, betrayal, they all swirled inside me like a storm with no center. I had seen her now. The woman who replaced me wasn't just a rumor, wasn't just a ghost haunting my thoughts. She was real, and she was standing in the life that used to be mine. And worse, she knew something my husband didn't want me to hear. I closed my eyes, inhaling the scent of paper and dust from the unopened envelopes in my hand. Somewhere in those letters were bills, notices, reminders of a life I was still clawing my way back into. But none of that mattered as much as the truth hanging between us, unspoken, taunting me. The neighborhood whispers had only scratched the surface. Now I had looked into her eyes, and I knew the Real story was still buried, waiting to be unearthed. And I was going to find it. The house was too quiet after I closed the door. My own breathing echoed in the stillness, ragged and uneven. I pressed the envelopes against my chest, staring at the floorboards as though the answers might appear between the cracks. She knew something. I had seen it in her eyes, in the way her mouth had opened only to shut again when he touched her arm. Whatever it wasn't small. It wasn't trivial. It was heavy enough to make her look guilty and him look afraid. That thought wouldn't leave me alone. It followed me into the kitchen, lingered as I set the mail down on the counter, and circled me like a shadow while I made tea just to keep my hands busy. The kettle hissed, steam curling upward, but the sound did nothing to drown out the pounding in my ears. I needed answers. The problem was, I didn't know where to start. My husband, or rather, the man who used to be my husband, had always been careful. He wasn't sloppy, not the kind to leave obvious trails. And yet, if this woman, the woman who had taken my place, was holding something back, then surely the truth was out there somewhere, waiting for me to find it. I sat at the table, tea untouched, and began to think like I used to back, when life hadn't felt like walking through shattered glass. Methodical, observant, patient. First step, listen. The neighborhood had already been buzzing with whispers. I had caught fragments in the grocery store aisle, half smiles exchanged over fences, voices dropping when I walked by. People knew things. People always knew things. So I decided I would start there. The next morning, I walked down the street under the guise of exercise. My legs still ached if I pushed them too far, but the steady rhythm of walking helped me clear my mind. At the corner, Mrs. Patterson was kneeling in her garden, tugging at stubborn weeds with thin, veined hands. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything the mail carrier's schedule, which neighbors left their trash bins out too long, and when a strange car parked on the block. "Morning, Emily," she said, her voice cautious, as though still adjusting to seeing me alive and moving again. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. My eyes drifted to the roses climbing along her fence. "They look beautiful this year." She straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her gloves. "They've had good weather." Then, after a pause, "I imagine you've seen her by now." The words landed like a stone in my stomach. I nodded. Mrs. Patterson's lips tightened. She keeps her head down most of the time, but folks talk. They can't help it. I leaned a little closer, lowering my voice. "What do they say?" She hesitated, glancing back toward my old house. "Only that things happened quicker than anyone expected. Too quick, if you ask me, and that she showed up with stories that never quite added up." My chest tightened. "Stories?" Mrs. Patterson gave a vague shrug. "Just things about where she came from, what she did before. Details that shifted depending on who she was talking to." Her eyes softened. "Be careful, dear. Sometimes the truth isn't what you want to hear." I thanked her and continued down the street, her warning echoing in my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, every hesitation from the day before. My curiosity was no longer just curiosity. It had hardened into determination. So I did something I never thought I would do. I opened my laptop and searched for her name. The glow of the screen lit up the dark room. I scrolled through results, social media accounts, tagged photos, mentions in small community newsletters. Most of it was ordinary, the kind of digital footprint anyone would have. But there were gaps. Years where she seemed to disappear completely, with no trace of where she lived or what she did. And then, tucked in the depths of an old newspaper archive, I found something strange. An article about a company that had gone bankrupt years ago, names listed of those involved. Her name was there, small, easy to miss, but it was hers. My pulse quickened. I clicked through, reading every detail. Mismanagement of funds, lawsuits, quiet settlements, and then silence, as though she had walked away from it all without consequence. Why had she hidden this? Why had my husband hidden it? I leaned back in my chair, the screen blurring as questions piled on top of one another. Maybe this was the truth she had wanted to tell me. Or maybe it was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. I asked careful questions at the grocery store, in line at the pharmacy, anywhere casual conversation might lead to slips of information. People were willing to talk, though not always directly. I learned she had arrived in the neighborhood with little explanation, that she avoided discussing her past, and that some folks swore they had seen her arguing with him late at night in the driveway. Each fragment was like a piece of glass. Alone, they meant little. Together, they began to form a sharp picture, one of secrets, lies, and something fragile that could shatter at any moment. But the most revealing moment came unexpectedly. I was leaving the post office when I heard my name. "Emily." I turned to see Marjorie, a woman I had known casually for years, hurrying toward me. She looked around as though making sure no one else could hear, before leaning closer. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," she whispered, "but you deserve to know." My heart thudded in my chest. "Know what?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I heard her on the phone the other day. She didn't see me, but I was right there in the next aisle. She was talking about money, large amounts, and she said something about making sure he never finds out." I froze, her words sinking deep into me. Money, secrets, lies. Marjorie's eyes flicked nervously toward the street. "Be careful, Emily." Something about her doesn't sit right. I thanked her, my voice barely above a whisper, and walked away in a daze. That night, sitting alone in the dark, I pieced it all together. The bankruptcy, the arguments, the phone call. She wasn't just the woman who replaced me. She was hiding something big. And somehow, my husband was tangled up in it. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in months, not just anger or grief, but power. For the first time since the crash, since losing my place in the life I had built, I wasn't just surviving. I was digging, uncovering, peeling back layers of a story they thought I would never hear. And I wasn't about to stop. The night after Marjorie's warning, I barely slept. Every creak in the house sounded louder than usual, every shadow longer. I sat in the living room with only the lamp on, the envelopes still untouched on the coffee table. My fingers tapped nervously against the armrest, my mind replaying her words over and over. Large amounts of money, make sure he never finds out. The truth was circling closer, and I knew I couldn't wait for it to fall into my lap. I had to force it out, even if it meant stepping directly into the fire. By morning, I'd made my decision. I dressed simply, jeans, a plain sweater, nothing that made me look like I was preparing for battle. Though that's exactly how I felt. As I walked down the familiar street toward my old house, the air carried the scent of damp leaves, a reminder that seasons had changed without me noticing. My palms were sweating, but I didn't turn back. Not this time. I knocked. The door opened. And there she was, the woman who had slipped into my life as easily as one might slip into a coat left hanging by the door. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes wary, as if she already knew why I'd come. "Emily," she said, my name falling out of her mouth like something sour. "We need to talk," I replied. My voice was steady, though my heart raced beneath my ribs. For a moment, I thought she'd slam the door. But instead, she stepped aside, letting me into the house that still felt like mine. The scent hit me first, cinnamon and fresh coffee, familiar yet foreign. My gaze swept the living room, landing on the framed photos. Him and her, smiling at barbecues, holding hands at the fair, posing with neighbors. My stomach twisted. She noticed my eyes lingering. "We made new memories," she said flatly, as though daring me to challenge her. I ignored the bait. "Tell me about the money." Her entire body stiffened. For the first time, she looked rattled. "I don't know what you're—" "Don't lie to me." My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. "I heard you. The phone call. The secrets. The bankruptcy. You've been hiding something, and I want to know what it is." She blinked rapidly, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. Before I could ask what she meant, a voice came from behind us. "What's going on here?" I turned sharply, and there he was, my husband, or at least the man who had been my husband, standing in the doorway, his tie loosened, his face pale. His eyes darted between us, confusion etched across his features. I spoke before he could. "Ask her. Ask your wife what she's been hiding." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" The woman's voice shook. "She doesn't know everything." "Then tell me," I snapped. "Tell both of us." Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she would. But then she said nothing, only stared at him with eyes full of fear. Something inside me snapped. "Fine. I'll say it. The bankruptcy, the missing money, the phone call about keeping secrets from him. Do you really think the truth won't come out?" His face drained of color. He turned to her slowly, his jaw tightening. "Is that true?" She stammered. I was going to explain." "Explain now." His voice boomed, echoing through the house. And that's when it happened. Her composure shattered, and a sound tore from her throat. Not words, not even a cry, but a scream. high-pitched, raw, piercing. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of what was crumbling around her, fear of the lies unraveling too fast to contain. I flinched at the sound, my body trembling. He stepped back, stunned. When the scream finally broke into sobs, she dropped to the floor, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she cried. "I thought you'd never find out." He stared at her, his voice low and dangerous. "Find out what?" Her answer came in fragments, broken and rushed, about the money she had taken, about debts she'd hidden, about deals she'd made in desperation. I stood frozen, my breath shallow. It wasn't just about love or betrayal anymore. It was about survival, greed, and lies that had tangled too tightly to undo. When she finally stopped talking, the room felt hollow. He looked at me, eyes wide with something between shame and realization. But I didn't say a word. I turned, walked to the door, and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, clearing the fog in my head. Behind me, their voices rose again, accusations, defenses, broken pieces of a life that no longer belonged to me. But I didn't need to hear any more. The scream had told me everything. It was over. As I walked back down the street, the weight I'd been carrying for months began to lift. For the first time since the crash, since the whispers, since the haunting presence of the woman who had replaced me, I felt something close to freedom. Not closure, not yet, but freedom, the kind that comes when the truth finally claws its way to the surface. And though the echoes of her screams still rang in my ears, I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't my burden anymore. Silence has a way of echoing louder than any scream. After that night, after the moment that fractured everything, I found myself sitting in the stillness, trying to make sense of what remained. The walls that once felt so familiar seemed foreign now, carrying the memory of voices raised, secrets unveiled, and the kind of truth no one is ever fully ready to face. People often say time heals, but I've learned that time doesn't erase. It reshapes. The wound doesn't disappear. It changes form, reminding you of where you've been, of the scars that tell your story. I walk past the same streets, see the same faces, and yet nothing feels the same. There's a weight to knowing how fragile trust can be, how quickly the ground beneath you can shift. And yet, strangely, in the wreckage, there's clarity. The scream that ended it all didn't just break something. It revealed what had already been cracked for far too long. It forced me to stop pretending, to stop clinging to the version of life I wished for, and to face the one I had. Painful as it was, it gave me back my voice. I carry forward now with quiet resolve, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with an understanding that survival sometimes means letting go of the pieces you can't mend. The neighborhood whispers may fade. The shadows of betrayal may linger. But I've learned that even in endings, there is a beginning stitched somewhere beneath. The scream was not just an end. It was also a release. And from that release, I found something I didn't expect. A strange kind of peace, fragile but real. It's not the life I imagined, but it is the life I will claim, step by step, breath by breath.